Well, I just want to start off by saying thank you to Dr. Chisha. I have made an amazing connection with you over the last 2 years. You've turned into a mentor to me, and I really appreciate what you've done to me. You've kind of taught me the importance of exploring my passions and just digging deeper and going past the classroom. And I really appreciate what you've done for me and what our connection has meant to me. So I just want to start off by saying thank you to that. But moving on to my presentation, good afternoon. I'm Nathan Cunningham, and this is my research presentation on FinTech in Sub-Saharan Africa and its impact on global aid. This presentation examines an intersection of two major global trends. The first of these includes the rapid rise of mobile money and digital finance in Sub-Saharan Africa, and the second part includes the parallel transformation of how supranational institutions like the World Bank and International Monetary Fund actually deliver development aid. So my paper is organized around 4 key interconnected themes. First, I explore the fintech landscape that has developed across sub-Saharan Africa over the past 2 decades. Second, I examine how development aid has evolved from traditional, centralized capital transfers toward more modern digital delivery systems. Third, I analyze how these 2 trends are directly connected, showing how the rise of fintech is enabling this shift in aid distribution. And fourth, I address a critical risk that comes with this transformation. Rural populations that lack access to digital tools or skills may be systematically excluded. Ultimately, the central problem that arises is that while digital aid significantly improves efficiency and transparency, it also introduces an exclusion challenge. Sub-Saharan Africa is currently undergoing a dual transformation. On one hand, the region is experiencing a significant financial revolution, which is driven by the rapid adoption of digital banking systems. These innovations have allowed many economies in the region to bypass traditional, capital-intensive banking infrastructure altogether. At the same time, supranational institutions like the IMF and the World Bank are also evolving in how they approach development aid. Historically, these institutions followed an ideology known as the Big Push theory, channeling large amounts of aid through central governments with the expectation that it would eventually funnel down and reach local communities. However, this traditional model has faced persistent challenges, including operational inefficiencies, information gaps, and substantial aid leakage due to limited oversight and corruption. In response, these institutions are now shifting away from that approach and instead are leveraging the region's expanding digital financial systems. This has led to the emergence of digitalized aid delivery, moving from broad, limited oversight, capital distribution towards a more targeted, efficient, and trackable system. Sub-Saharan Africa is not simply catching up to global banking systems, it is effectively skipping entire stages of financial development. This phenomenon is known as financial leapfrogging. Instead of investing heavily in physical infrastructure, many countries in the region move directly to mobile-based financial systems. A key driver of this shift is mobile phone adoption, which has reached roughly 80 phones per 100 people across sub-Saharan Africa, creating the foundation for widespread digital finance. One of the most prominent examples of this financial development is a platform known as M-Pesa, which is a mobile money network launched in Kenya in 2007. Today, it serves over 50 million users daily and processes more than $1 billion in transactions each month across 7 different countries. The first phase of mobile money adoption in sub-Saharan Africa was very simple. It was peer-to-peer transactions through SMS, which means that users could send money directly to one another via text message. You can think of this as Venmo. While basic, this was transformative for millions of people who previously had no access to formal banking services. The second phase introduced more advanced features, including digital wallets, bill payments, and agent banking networks. These agents, which are often local shopkeepers, act as physical access points, allowing users to deposit and withdraw cash, essentially functioning as human ATMs. This is something that I will touch on a little more later. The third and current phase is what many researchers refer to as super apps. These are integrated online platforms that combine the already implemented payment systems with other services like savings accounts, credit lines, and insurance, all within a singular digital interface. The scale of adoption is significant. About 7% of adults in sub-Saharan Africa now borrow through mobile money accounts. And because traditional borrowing options remain limited, this accounts for roughly 60% of all formal borrowing in the region. At this point, mobile money is no longer just an alternative to traditional banking. It has effectively become the banking system for a large portion of the population. One of the most common misconceptions about fintech in sub-Saharan Africa is that it is purely digital, when in reality, it relies heavily on a physical layer known as agent banking networks. These networks consist of local shopkeepers and small vendors who are registered as mobile money agents and essentially function as human ATMs within their communities. Mobile money agents provide cash liquidity services as well as cash deposit sites, allowing mobile money to continue its development and expansion across the region. If individuals receive money digitally but they need cash, they go to an agent. If they have cash and want to send it digitally, they can also go to an agent. This system bridges the gap between digital finance and the physical economy. The scale of this network is substantial. In 2025 alone, mobile money agents processed $430 billion in cash transactions, representing a 20% increase from the previous year and the highest annual growth rate in 4 years. This highlights a key point. In many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where traditional bank branches are non-existent or located hundreds of kilometers away, these agents provide essential financial access points to the people. Ultimately, agent banking networks serve as a critical aspect to enable mobile money systems to function, scale, and remain inclusive. Now, let's shift to the other side of the equation, development aid. For decades, supranational institutions like the IMF and World Bank operated under the Big Push theory, which argues that underdeveloped economies need large, coordinated investments to overcome structural barriers and achieve macroeconomic growth. In practice, this led to a top-down aid model. Funds were distributed from supranational institutions to central governments through concessional loans and grants, with the expectation that they would be passed down to local communities. These funds were typically directed towards physical infrastructure projects like roads, bridges, and agricultural inputs. However, this system relied on the assumption that central governments were the most effective and trustworthy channels for distributing aid. In reality, that assumption often failed. Once funds reached the central government level, there was very limited oversight, creating opportunities for inefficiency and corruption. As a result, funds were frequently diverted through bribery, inflated contracts, or shell companies. Resources meant for development, like fertilizer for farmers, often never reached the intended recipients in the region. Meanwhile, these countries were accumulating sovereign debt associated with these projects despite the limited real impact on the ground. The academic framework that best explains the failure of traditional aid is the principal agent problem. In this case specifically, supranational institutions act as the principal. They provide the funding, but they lack the direct visibility into how that money is actually used. The central or local governments act as the agents. They possess private information about how funds are allocated and spent. The information asymmetry creates a fundamental issue. Because the principal cannot fully monitor the agent may act in its own interest rather than in the interest of the intended recipients. This can take many forms, some of which I touched on earlier, that include bribery, inflated contracts, and the use of shell companies. Even when funds are allocated properly on paper, the actual resources are often diverted and sold in secondary markets instead of reaching the intended population. The result is a system where countries accumulate sovereign debt tied to these aid programs, while the people these programs are meant to help receive little to no benefit. This structural failure is what pushed supranational institutions to seek a more transparent and accountable approach to aid delivery. So, what does this new system look like? The center of the shift is government-to-person, or G2P systems. Instead of sending large sums of money to central governments, aid is now delivered directly to individuals through mobile money platforms. In other words, supranational institutions are using fintech to bypass traditional intermediaries and deposit funds straight into the verified digital wallets of the recipients. This represents a structural redesign of the aid model. The key advantages are transparency and precision. Unlike the old system, which relied on manually audited invoices that could easily be manipulated, digital transfers create a real-time, end-to-end data stream. If there is any deviation from the intended flow of funds, it is immediately flagged and investigated. As a result, many of the hidden costs and corrupt practices that existed in the traditional system become far more difficult to conceal. Ultimately, this digital transition directly addresses the core issue of information asymmetry and significantly reduces the principal agent problem that historically has undermined the effectiveness of development aid. In the relationship between fintech and development aid, supranational institutions are not introducing entirely new technologies into the region, but instead they are leveraging a pre-existing, highly developed fintech ecosystem. This fintech infrastructure already includes key components such as mobile wallets, agent banking networks that provide liquidity and real-time transaction data. What supranational institutions are doing is they are plugging their modernized aid delivery mechanisms directly on top of this system and into it. As a result, development aid is no longer dependent on central governments to distribute funds. Instead, institutions can deliver payments directly to individuals through government-to-person systems, effectively removing the traditional central government intermediary. The benefits include greater precision in targeting recipients, accountability through real-time transaction data, and scalable distribution that can reach populations far beyond the limits of physical banking systems. Most importantly, it targets the problem of corruption and leakage head-on. Digital government-to-person aid is built on a key assumption that recipients have access and ability to use digital systems. However, Richard Heek's academic framework, known as the design-reality gap, shows that this assumption does not always hold, especially in developing and emerging economies. There are two main types of design gaps. The first is the hard design gap, which occurs when the technical requirements like smartphones, internet, and electricity don't match the available infrastructure. In many rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa, these limitations mean digital programs can struggle before they even begin. The second is the soft design gap. Even when physical infrastructure is present, adoption of a digitalized system can still fail if it does not align with local behaviors. Many individuals may not trust digital financial tools, may lack experience with mobile wallets, or simply they prefer the traditional cash-based transactions that you've been used to. While sub-Saharan Africa is making progress in expanding connectivity, access remains highly uneven across the region. Urban areas are improving much faster than rural areas, creating a digital infrastructure gap. When you combine these infrastructure and behavioral challenges, the result is a threat of exclusion of the populations that digital aid is intended to help the most. Addressing this requires more than just expanding infrastructure. It also requires investment in education and digital skills to ensure that people can actually use and benefit from these new systems. The digital infrastructure gaps within sub-Saharan Africa are a real concern for supranational institutions. Rural agrarian communities, where many of the aid-dependent populations live, continue to face significant barriers to inclusion, including unreliable electricity, low smartphone penetration, weak cellular coverage, and economies that rely heavily on cash. This creates a major challenge for digital aid delivery because the populations most in need often have the least access to these systems. Supranational institutions, more particularly the World Bank, are aware of this gap and are investing heavily to address it. Over the past decade, the World Bank has managed 35 digital development projects in the region, including 11 completed projects worth about $731.8 million and 24 active projects totaling out to $2.8 billion. These investments reflect an acknowledgement of the issue. Before transitioning to fully digital aid systems, institutions are working to build the necessary technological foundation, what can be thought of as an enabling environment. Digital aid cannot succeed without this infrastructure in place, but it raises an important question. Is this development happening fast enough and broadly enough to ensure that the most vulnerable populations are not left behind? To conclude, Sub-Saharan Africa is experiencing a major transformation in how development aid is delivered. Supranational institutions are moving away from traditional big push capital transfers, which are often associated with corruption and inefficiency, towards government-to-person digital aid systems. This shift is significant because it builds on fintech that was largely developed within the region. As a result, aid delivery is becoming more efficient, transparent, and precise. However, this transformation introduces new challenges. Rural agrarian populations, who are often the most vulnerable, frequently lack reliable electricity, connectivity, access to devices, and digital literacy. In addition, trust in digital financial systems is not universal. This creates a real risk of exclusion. For the population, these systems are designed to help may struggle to utilize them. The central takeaway from my research is that digital aid has the potential to be both more efficient and more inclusive, but only if the enabling environment is developed alongside it. That means investing not just in technology, but also in human capability, education, access, and trust at the same time. Thank you.